abilities. It's quite an embarrassing story. I was once driving in our car with my wonderful wife Jen, gracious wife Jen, and who is very gifted musically. And there's a good beat on the song on the radio, and so I'm just kind of bouncing my head to the song, thinking I'm kind of going along with it. And she looks over at me and says, "Dear, are you okay?" And I say, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just And she's like, "Oh, I thought you were having a seizure or something." I have I have a lack of rhythm. But worship is something that we are all called to. Now, I know that this week is the week of Thanksgiving. I personally believe that Thanksgiving kind of gets robbed nowadays. It just gets jammed into this whole section called the holidays. People get more excited about Black Friday than they do about Thanksgiving, which says something about our culture. Everybody they get all geeked up about Halloween or angry about Halloween, and that goes through the new year, and it's just this kind of big clump called the holidays. Thanksgiving is just kind of thrown in there. In fact, I saw someone, a buddy of mine, put something up on Facebook. He said that Thanksgiving is like John the Baptist. It's just the predecessor of something much greater. But that's so true. We like Thanksgiving because it tells us that Christmas is coming. There used to be a rule that you don't put up your Christmas decorations until Friday, right? The day after Thanksgiving. Everybody knows that rule. Jen and I, we tried to put up Christmas decorations early this year, and her mom was in town, and her mom refused. No, not until after Thanksgiving. And it's just, what a slap in the face of Thanksgiving. The lights are already up and it's on. Christmas music playing, commercials have started. We're in it. But ultimately, there's also a bit of a dark edge to the Christmas season, right? It's not all this joy and happiness. There's also, I think, a darker edge to the Christmas season. You'll hear words that nobody really gives any time to think about, but I just want to throw out to you the phrase, the Christmas blues. Have you heard that phrase before? There's this thing that happens to people where the holiday days, it kind of puts them into a depression. The truth is that sometimes holidays, they don't bring families together, right? We like to think of Thanksgiving, all about family. Christmas, about family. But sometimes bringing the family together, like my 4 brothers and I, is just like setting a grenade off. Sometimes you get everything you wanted, and you still have that nagging feeling there. Sometimes the season is terribly lonely because you've lost a loved one or you've been isolated from parts of your family for one reason or another. I could go on and on here. What happens is unbridled expectations slam into reality. And what I want to do this morning as we come into the Advent season is to orient our hearts to a reality that will never let you down, which is the worship of God. So we're going to do 2 things. First, we're going to look at what is worship. What is it that we are called to do? What is worship? And then secondly, what's the grounding? What's the foundation of that worship? Worship comes from an old English word, worthship. Timothy Keller describes it this way: worship is ascribing ultimate value to something in a way that energizes and engages your whole person. Worship it's an act of ascribing ultimate value to something in such a way that it engages your ultimate being. So come with me to Psalm 100. He starts off saying, "Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing." Let's just unpack that together. First, worship, according to this text, is something that engages your entire being, your mind, your will, and your emotions. First of all, it engages your will. Notice that the psalm starts with three verbs inviting us to worship. He calls us to activity, to action, right? Make a joyful noise. Serve the Lord. Come into his presence. Worship is not something done when you feel like it. Because ultimately, worship is not a reflection of our feelings, but a declaration of our faith. Let me just repeat that. Worship is not a reflection of our feelings, but a declaration of our faith. No, he's declaring something. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Come into his presence with singing. We come in not based upon our feelings, as Hans was saying, how our week's gone. We come in declaring our faith, who he is, what he has done in our lives, in our hearts. But true worship does evoke emotion. Notice it's an invitation for joyful worship, right? Not just worship, but joyful worship. Make a joyful noise. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing. It's a call for exuberant, vocal, joyful worship. It's a call for exuberant, joyful, vocal worship. The predominant thing that characterizes biblical worship is joy. Yes, there are times of reflection. There are times of repentance, of mourning, and those are very appropriate aspects of worship and very appropriate in worship. But joy ought to be a recurring, if not dominant, emotion in our worship. And you see it all throughout here. Make a joyful noise, serve the Lord with gladness. In verse 4, we enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. I've read every command in the Bible on worship. You can go through the Bible and go through the Psalms. The Psalms, it's the biggest book in the Bible. You go through and just read all the commands on worship. None of them say, stand in a subdued manner, holding your coffee, with a bored look on your face. David never says, I show my passion to God through my cool, laid-back attitude. We talked about this a few weeks ago. Some people say, well, if I don't feel like doing those things, I don't want to be inauthentic. But the question is, again, not what you feel, but what he's worthy of. There's nothing in these verses about feelings. There are no conditional clauses. Make a joyful noise. Not if you feel like it, but you do it. So worship, it engages our will. It's something we are called to do. Go do this. Serve the Lord. Make a joyful noise. Come into his presence. And we're to do that that should evoke an emotion, joy. Lastly, it also engages our mind. Notice he says in verse 3, know that the Lord, he is God. When you think of knowledge, of knowing, we use it in a lot of different fashions. We know, like you know facts, right? Like I can, what I can do, but someone could tell you how far away the moon is. X millions of miles or whatever. So we use know like facts. But there's also another kind of know, which is this kind of personal relationship with someone, right? Because I could stand up here and I could describe to you my wife and give you, all these different facts about her or about my kids. But unless you've, actually spent time with them, unless that's one kind of knowledge. But unless you've interacted with them and seen them and lived with them, you don't really know them. And the psalmist here calls us. He says, know the Lord, he is God. And so worship is not this kind of emptying your mind like a Zen-like state. Right? That's not worship. And neither is it just kind of raw emotion, right? Like, woo, I don't know why I'm excited, but I'm so excited. You see that in little kids all the time, right? Their emotions just kind of take them everywhere. They're sad and happy, and they're just, I don't know why, I'm just so sad. So it's not this pure emotion. There's a knowing. Our mind is engaged in worship. So it activates your mind. Or rather, it is what we know that stimulates worship. So worship, it engages our mind, our will, and our emotions. And we have to get this. Because if you come here and you affirm the doctrines and beliefs, and if you do that without ever really experiencing in your inner being the ravishing beauty and joy of God, it's not worship. Or let me flip that over. You can go to a service and experience emotion and weep. But if it doesn't change the fundamental way you live, your life patterns, your will, your mind, it's not worship. Because, worship isn't just singing. Yes, singing is worship as we together as a community praise God, but that's not the only worship. It's a constant act of ascribing absolute worth to God. So that Paul says in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, it says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable worship. The presenting of your bodies, of your entire being to God, ascribing Him absolute worth. That is your spiritual worship. Again, worship, it comes from the Old English worth shape phrase, worth shape. To be shaped by the worth of something. It's to look at something and say, that is so valuable. If I have that, I am worth something. And everybody is doing that, especially this time of year as you get into Thanksgiving and Christmas. If I could just achieve that this next year, or if I could just get that, if I could just get family, or if we could just get these presents, then I will be worth something to my kids. You're worshiping it. You're being shaped by it. I was trying to think of an illustration for this. Anyone remember the Antique Roadshow? Is that people know? Okay, is that still going on? It is. Okay, I haven't seen it in years, but I loved that show. I don't know what it is about shows like that, but I love them. Another great one was the American Pickers. They go around and looking for treasure and garage sales or things like that. So imagine Antique Roadshow comes into town. And there's this woman who's inherited a ring from her mother, and it's been around in the family for years, for generations, and, no one really knows, how it got into the family, but it just, it's been hanging around for years. And so one day, Antique Roadshow comes into town, and she takes it to get appraised. It's been just kind of, sits around on the dresser or whatever, but, it's kind of cool and old. Why don't we, take it in and maybe they know, some stuff about it. And the jeweler, jewelers are a bit like librarians, I feel like. They kind of, don't really get too excited about things. He gets out, they have those little eyepieces, and so he takes it in and, get the eyepiece and, so he's, looking at it and inspecting it and looking at the texture and bit by bit, several minutes, he takes off the one eye thing and maybe puts on the other and his breathing starts to get heavy as he realizes, this is some lost ancient piece of jewelry. No one even knows how to make this anymore. It's priceless. It's unique in its beauty. And he's suddenly experiencing in his mind, will, and emotions is all engaged because he realizes the value of what he has in his hand. And he realizes that there's this treasure, this diamond in the rough here amongst all of these other knickknacks and on the Antique Roadshow. And of course, when the woman comes to understand the true value of what this thing is, she also is astounded. She's thunderstruck and realizes she has not been living in accordance with what she had. Here's a thing worth, millions, and, they just had it sitting around on the dresser. Her entire life is now changed now that she realizes the value of it. The psalmist is telling us to do exactly what the jeweler and the woman do in that image, in that illustration, right? That to realize, to understand the absolute worth and value of the Lord. We know from the polls that most people in America believe in God. They say, I pray sometimes, I believe there is a God and a creator, but they have the God the way that woman had the ring, completely unaffected, completely unaware of his value. The difference between a limp along life and a transformed life, a life that's shot through with joy and thanksgiving, is not the difference between believing in God and not believing in God. It's the difference between worshiping God and not worshiping God. It's not just like, I'll come in and get a little inspiration this morning, a morning coffee just like a little pick-me-up. It's not something that, it makes me feel part of a community. Worship is ascribing ultimate value to God in such a way that it galvanizes and energizes and transforms your whole life. That's worship. Okay, so if that's what worship is, what is it that triggers that worship, that engages and activates our mind, will, and emotions? We see that in verse 3. Know that the Lord, He is God. It is He who made us, and we are His. We are His people and the sheep of His pasture. The real foundation for worship is the Lord. Here's what we know of Him. He is the Lord. He made us. We are His. And the reference here, it's not to the work of creation. It says, He made us. We are His. I don't think that's referring to the work of creation, although that might be true, right? He created us. But to the work of God in creating a people who are His very own. Once we were not, but now we are a people. Once we had not received mercy, but now we have received mercy. Does that ring a bell in anyone's mind? We read that last week in 2 Peter. Let me jump there. Should have this ready. Or sorry, not 2, but 1 Peter chapter 2. You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for His own possession, that you may proclaim excellencies of Him who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. We are His people, the sheep of His pasture. The wonder of it is that He has brought us into fellowship so that we can enter His presence. Just think of the idea of entering into His presence. The psalmist uses the image of courts and gates. Enter His courts with thanksgiving and His gates with praise. Gate kind of, a gate is kind of like a door. There's a couple, a number of different dimensions to it. The other day, our door at home has this latch on the top that's like a chain. Does anyone kind of have doors like that? And we never lock it, except Jen or her mom or someone locked it the other day. And so I'm coming home and I have my hands full of stuff and have coffee in my hand. And I open the handle and you go to get in and get about like this far and then the door jerks, just stops. And I'm like entering with all my force. And so coffee, I drop everything. Coffee spills on me, spills on the door. God's green pastures, God's temple gates are wide open in Jesus. Amen? And just, think of, it evokes and brings up this image of the temple, the Jerusalem temple. It was not a building conveniently constructed for congregational worship. It was the Lord's dwelling. It's where the very real presence of the Lord dwelt. And here's the thing that we looked at last week that Peter tells us. He says, Jesus Christ is the cornerstone, and he says we are being built on that cornerstone. That we as a church, when we come together and worship, I think as Hans was alluding to, the Lord is here amongst us. In fact, see that phrase in verse 1, come into his presence with singing. Literally, before his face, lafanav, before his face, right? You come into his presence, it's, he's right there. That's the kind of access we have. The beautiful thing through Jesus' sacrifice is that we have free and constant access through the gates into God's presence. There's no waiting in line. There's no fee. Well, there was a fee, but it's been paid. The blood of Jesus Christ. And that's why we enter with thanksgiving, because we are his and he is our God. And he is good. His love is steadfast. He is faithful. And if that doesn't hit you here, right? So that, it's engaging our mind, but that hits us here. And if it doesn't, if you don't understand that gospel, you will turn worship into one more work. It's going to be one more thing on your rat race. If I come to worship and do it right, and if I raise my hands and sing real loud, and get excited and never miss church, then God will bless me. And here's the thing, is that instead of transformational worship, it will just be one more load weighing you down. And you'll be looking to yourself, not to him, and you won't have a life just shot through with joy and thanksgiving. C.S. Lewis, in his book on the Psalms, he wrote this little short book on the Psalms, a reflection on the Psalms. And he wrote about how when he first converted to Christianity, he said he didn't get the whole praise thing. It's like, why are these Christians, why are they always telling us to praise God? Why does, in the Psalms, why is God always saying, praise me, praise me? Because, if you go to a party and you got some guy or gal there and they're, looking for all the attention, you would say, what a tool, what a fool, saying everyone look at me, everyone praise me. Why is God acting like that? That really, C.S. Lewis, he really struggled with that. And he says that the most obvious thing about praise escaped me. I didn't realize that all enjoyment springs forth into praise. Lovers praise each other. Readers praise good books. Walkers praise the countryside. Those who love sports praise their favorite teams. Praise of weather, wines, dishes, actors, horses, countries, children, flowers, mountains, everything. He says the whole world rings forth with praise. It's the spontaneous enjoyment and praise of what is valuable to you. And then he says, I have noticed how the humblest and most balanced minds praise the most, while the cranks, the misfits, and malcontents praise the least. I'm just struck by that statement. The psalmist, in calling forth praise to God, the psalmist, they're just doing what all people do when they speak about what they care about. Calling forth praise to God out of enjoyment of him, because of who he is. Let me give you a few ways for how we can grow, I think, in our worship. Number one, in community. You miss it in the English, but all of these words are in plural. All of these commands. The Hebrew, it's an inflected language, and get a little bit boring if I go into it. But so all of these commands, make a joyful noise, sing to the Lord, enter his gates, they're all plural commands, which means you plural. So you all make a joyful noise. He's calling for to do it in community. It's not just singular, but you all together. And notice he also says, it is he who made us. We are his people. We collectively are his, and collectively are the sheep of his pasture. We're being called to worship in a community. Now, of course, you're supposed to be good at individual worship. But I would have to say, as far as I can understand, is that individual worship is a preparation for corporate worship, for community worship, which is the real transforming experience. C.S. Lewis, C.S. Lewis Day, I guess, put it in a way that's unsurpassed. He had this kind of close, intimate group of friends. And suddenly, one of his friends, Charles, died. And when their friend Charles died, one of their other friends, Jack, said, well, this is terrible. But I guess now that Charles is gone, I will have more of each of you, of Ronald. Now we have more time to spend together. And I don't have to share him with Charles anymore. But to his surprise, he discovered that there were certain things that only Charles brought out. There are certain parts of each other's personality and hearts that Charles, and only Charles, brought out. C.S. Lewis realized that when Charles died, he didn't get more of his other friends. In fact, he got less of them. Because no one individual can draw out the entire personality. You can only know somebody completely well in a community. You see what he's saying there? Right? It's in community that you see and get to know each other as you respond together. And if that is true of a finite human being, how much more is that true of an infinite God? So that, there are aspects of God, that there are parts of God, of his beauty and power and goodness that you will only ever see in community. By seeing how God is at work in you, I see and understand and experience a part of God I would never experience if I did not know you. And that's true for each and every one of us here, right? It's as you see God at work in one another, you see aspects and facets like that ring, right? You see different parts, different beauties of who God is as he is at work and alive in each and every one of us, and as we walk with him together. So I think, first off, in one way that we worship is we do that in community together. Second off, you need truth. Now, this is a weird one because, again, this doesn't really fit in with our modern spirituality. Neither does the community thing. A lot of times we think of spiritual worship as being a personal thing, right? It's between me and God, when actually it's a communal community thing. Likewise, truth. We don't really think of worship. We think of worship, again, more emotional and feeling than truth. But notice how the psalmist has submitted to what the prophets have said about God. He doesn't say God is like our shepherd. He says God is our shepherd. He's making truth claims about God. And he's submitting to the scripture as a self-revelation of God. And by through submitting to that, he is able to say, let's take this and look at the excellencies. And so that all of the emotion, all of the transformation is coming through something that the psalmist is doing. He's taking an inventory of the excellencies of God. He's going over them and going through them, naming them one by one, reflecting on them until there is just an explosion of joy in his life. Right? You see, the Lord, know that the Lord, he is God. He made us. We are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. And he concludes, for the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations. He's just going through the excellencies of who God is and how he works and his goodness. Thirdly, you need the Spirit. Now, the word Spirit doesn't show up here, but it does say this, that the purpose of worship is to come into his presence, to come before him, to enter his gates. Why does it say that? Isn't God everywhere, right? God's omnipresent, he's everywhere. So if God's everywhere, why would he say, come into his presence? Because he's everywhere. You're always in his presence. The Bible also says, David says in Psalm 51, cast me not, O Lord, from your presence. Or why does Isaiah say, oh, that you would divide the heavens and come down. Oh, that the mountains would melt at your presence. The answer is that, in spite of the fact that God is everywhere, this is true, it's a truth that the Bible affirms of God. By the mediation of the Holy Spirit, if you use the truth and do this in community and understand the purpose and nature of worship, sometimes the Holy Spirit will make you aware of the presence of God. You will sense his reality. He will be present, palpable. You can almost feel him. Present in his power, present in his grace, or present in his love, or present in his majesty, or all of them together. And that is your expectation and your goal to sense and come into his presence. Let me close with this. Isaiah 53:11 says, out of the anguish of his soul, he will see and be satisfied. Again, coming back to worship, what is it that moves us to worship? What is it that drives us to worship? It's going through the character of God. It's almost in Psalm 100, he is the Lord, his goodness endures forever. This passage in Isaiah 53 says, out of the anguish of his soul, he will see and be satisfied. That verse is talking about the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And in the midst of his anguish, of his sacrifice, what was it that he saw? What was it that made him go, it was all worth it? That I am satisfied. Right? He will see the results and be satisfied. What is it that he was satisfied with? What was it that was worth all of that to him? It was you. It was me. And this is what we praise and worship and give thanks for. God loving you so much that he sent his son for us. And Jesus says, it was worth it. It is finished. It was all worth it to make you his people, to bring you into his pasture, to bring you into his presence with joy, with singing. For the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations. Amen? Amen. What I'd like to do is, Justin, if you grab your mic, I want to, for us as a church, as a community, to do that together.